Mating parts together is the fundamental skill of working with assemblies. Mates are very similar to sketch relations. We choose two or more faces, planes, lines, or points, and then choose how they'll be connected. The most basic is a coincident mate. This is basically just saying the two items are touching. Let's take a look. In our window here, we see we've got a block, which is at the origin, which is our first part there, and then we've got two more parts that we've added into this assembly. And so we're going to jump into the very most basic mates. To get started, let's click on Mate. As soon as I open that up, notice the first window here is the entities to mate. So anything I'm going to select in here is going to automatically start mating things together. We also have these standard mates here, like coincident, parallel, perpendicular, tangent, concentric, and some distances and angles we can put in there as well. By default, SolidWorks is actually going to find out which mate is going to be the most appropriate when we select our pair. So we always have to pick a pair, a minimum of two things to create a mate. So for example, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to pick the outside of this boss here. Now you can pick an edge, you can pick a point, you can pick a face, you can do a lot of different things, but it's always better to pick faces versus edges, or edges over points. The bigger they are, the harder they are to break. I'm going to go ahead and select that face there. Notice it highlights. And then the face that I want to be going around that. We're going to have a concentric mate. So these two faces are going to be concentric. So if I click on this face here, notice what happens. That moves into position, and now by default it selects, hey, this is probably what you're looking for, is concentric mate, because I've picked two concentric circles or two concentric faces. Once I click OK, that mate is now established. So if I click OK, it'll turn it off, or it continues to stay active. The mate window stays open, so I can continue just to pick pairs of faces to mate together. If I pick this face here, and I pick this face here, it creates another mate. This time it chooses coincident because it's saying you're picking two faces that can be easily coincident. Makes sense. We could also change that to parallel or distance if we wanted to as well, but SolidWorks just assumes one, and you can always change it to something else if you'd like to. Once you're happy with that, you click on OK, and then I'm going to close that mate window. Now notice this part here. It's got a little spacing off there because we made it the front of this face with that face there. And I can spin this part around right now still, because if you notice this little negative or minus sign in the front of that part, that means the part's not fully defined yet. Now if I'm going to click on that part here, and I'm going to show its right plane, and then I'm going to make sure we turn on planes so we can see them. I'm going to go ahead and hide these other planes here so we don't see those while we're mating things together. So you can always turn planes on and off just like that to easily see where they are. And planes are a really great way to mate, and we're going to go cover those in a future chapter here. So now if I move this part around, you can see that that plane's spinning around, right? There's no degrees of freedom if we were to lock that plane down. So for instance, I'll say like that plane there, and I'll mate it to like the outside of this. And I'll say, these are actually maybe parallel. As soon as I do that, let's look at this part. Notice it used to have a minus sign in front of it, and now it doesn't. That means it's fully defined. So most items are going to need a minimum of 3 mates to fully define their location. Now you don't have to have fully defined parts. That's fine. We might want this thing to be able to spin around here, and that's fine. But just keep that in mind. If you see a little negative sign there, it means the part's not fully defined. But now it is, right? So we've locked the plane, so the orientation, we've got the face, and we know the location where it is. Let's try a couple more here. This time, this is kind of like a small screw or a representation of a screw without the threading and things like that in there. Make sure we want to put that in the hole. We also have this angle or a chamfer that we're going to mate to this other chamfer here. So we have a bunch of different mate options. So first, let's get into the mate window. Let's click on the outside face and click on that. And then we're going to spin around, and this is the other face. So the best way to think about mates is to say it out loud. You say, I want the outside of this screw on the inside of that hole. And that's your mate pair. As soon as you pick that pair, they move into position, and now that's mated. Once you have a mate, now these things can move around. So I can drag this up and down, but the mate is always going to be established here. And if you look at the mates over here, at the very bottom of our feature manager, I can expand that box out by clicking on the plus, and then I've got all the different mates, and I can click on them to highlight them, and they'll show the pair that's being mated together. That last mate we did, which is concentric mate. If you didn't want that one, you can just hit delete and delete that mate. Now I can move this thing around anywhere I wanted to. To put it back, just go mate, select that pair, select that, and there we go. We have a couple more mates we're going to add to this. So this time I'm going to pick this face here. Pick that face there. Go up here, I'm going to pick that face there. I'm going to say coincident. Right, and that brings that down into the hole. So we got a nice mate here. And in fact, if you think about those mates, making those two coincident, we actually don't need the mate before that. This one here, it's redundant, right? Because by making these two faces here coincident, it actually establishes both the location and the depth that's going to be in there and the concentricity all in one shot. So if I got rid of this one here, I just click on it and hit delete. It's not going to hurt anything to have it there, but I can now only spin this part. I can't move it up and down, and I can't move it right or left. Right, so it's fully defined. And notice I'm using faces. I'm choosing faces to mate things together. So the priority of mating is, number one, most powerful thing would be choosing the fundamental planes, right? Because the planes are always going to be there. They start there when you start your part. So if you mate a plane to another plane, it's going to be the most solid mate you can choose. Secondly would be faces. If I pick an entire face to mate to something else, that's probably going to stick around. Whereas if I pick an edge to mate to something else, if I were to chamfer that edge or radius it or do something else like that, as soon as that edge is no longer there, that mate's going to fail. And so let's try a couple of failed mates. And notice this part here. We've got the back of this part right there. I can select that part by grabbing the back of the part. Now I'm going to say that back of that part, let's mate that together with this face here. As soon as I do that, it's going to say, hey, both of these are already fully defined. But I'm going to say, it doesn't matter. I'm going to put it on there. I'm going to say, okay. But it's going to warn you, hey, we can't do that. It's going to cause errors. But if we were to change something in these parts to make one of these mate faces go away, it would change the way this is mated together. So I'm going to open that part here, and I'm going to go and I'm going to select that top face. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle over it, and I'm just going to cut a little bit away. I'm just going to trim off just a little bit of that, make it a little thinner. So now I've changed that part. When I go back to that assembly, it says update the thing, and I say okay. And now look what happens. It says we got all these red errors. It's saying, hey, this coincident mate can no longer do it because that face is no longer there, right? It's moved in. We chopped off that face. It's highlighting the two faces or the two parts that actually made up that mate pair. So we got this part here, and it's showing that mate again is in there. And each part itself has the mates that are assigned to that. So the mates that are inside the part are the exact same mates that are down here. They're just listed twice. This is all the mates in the entire assembly, and these are the mates that only apply just to that part. All right, so if I go ahead and I delete that mate here, click OK, it fixes all the mates. But now the problem is that's free floating. Move in and out. So I need to go back and remate that to fix it. And there it is. These basic mate tools will help you build your models. When building mates, try to choose items that are stronger versus weaker or easier to break. For instance, parts start with 3 fundamental planes, and we cannot remove them. So if you mate 2 planes together, there's no way to break that mate. However, if you mate a corner point of your part to something else, anything that changes that point will break that mate. Try to think about the easiest and most robust way to mate parts.